Welcome to Accountants Law Pod, where accounting professionals and law firms converge. Hosted by Linda Artisani, Sarah Prevost, and Stephen Libhart.
Welcome back. How are you both?
Good.
Yeah?
The year is flying by.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I know.
What's with that?
Today is one deadline day. Next one's coming up. We're in the middle of March right now. So, which is a good time to kind of go through some cleanup stuff, right? Like our topic today is client ledger cleanup hacks, and it sounds kind of funny to say it as a title like that, but we've got some ideas and tips and tricks to push out there.
I actually listened to a podcast this morning that,
Yes.
the one I've been following that I shared with you that's about like cleaning up your life. And
Yeah.
I cleaned my closet this weekend yesterday. I went through
Okay.
Sunday and I went through the entire closet, and my husband came in, he goes, "What is going on?" I threw all the shoes on the floor on this bench, and he's like, "I'm getting out of here." And then he came back in and I had all the clothes on the bed. And I actually tried on clothes. I made a pile of like skinny jeans that will someday come back in style, but are not. And I put them aside because I don't want to throw them away. I'm going to just kind of
Yeah.
stick them up in the closet. And then clothes that didn't fit and clothes that are old and shoes that were so old. Because in Florida, the humidity kind of kills them off. If they're not leather, they just kind of disintegrate.
Yeah.
So I had two giant bags, and I was listening to that because that lady gave some good tips, because she said one of the things is try to put your piles with like items. So don't try to overthink every single thing and try to figure out where things go. Put like things with like. And then that made me start to think about this topic, because
Yes.
not so much this, but she also said she was doing a puzzle, and it occurred to her like you had 1,000 things in your closet, 1,000-piece puzzle.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? And you want to look at, what do you want this file to look like at the end that the puzzle's put together. Now, with a puzzle, you have a little picture on the front cover, whereas in our world, you have to visualize what the file will look like. And I'm sure we'll get into
Yes.
some of the steps of that.
Yes.
But I think that's the best way to even sell it to the client, is sell the cover on the box of the picture to the client, and then get into the minutia of cleaning it up, because it can be big. It
Yeah.
can be really big.
Well, it's because this is really tailored to accounting people, this particular episode, but in general, what you just said, which I mean, you both tell me if this sounds to you the picture. We get the story. You're telling us the puzzle pieces. We have to assimilate in dialogue what this could look like without looking under the hood. So this is why it's important for any sort of file review to occur, so
Yeah.
that we can understand the tangible pieces to be better at saying, okay, look, this is what we foresee as a process in order for this to be cleaned up, or workflows to be shifted or changed. To your point, like you've got a million things you're looking at, but the picture is hard to follow. So if we look at the tangible pieces and then describe it as a holistic picture, but inside of it, and we've both, all three of us have discussed this in prior episodes, it's how the workflow is, it's how the pieces go together and how they fit, like you're saying, Linda, and the like pieces have to, it's not an easy thing to see when you're in the middle of it as a business owner, just as a pure owner. So I don't know, what do we want to start with? What would be some of the pieces, I guess?
Well, sometimes it's messy. So you've got
Yeah.
this giant mess, and you've heard, like you said, you've heard the story in the conversation you had with them. And then you're sitting there and you're like, okay, I think sometimes the first thing I drive to is the chart of accounts and cleaning that up, fixing that, because it's always
Yeah.
wrong, messy, lots of old stuff on it. Before I even dive into the trust, which is always the second place that we kind of go, because I just need it to be organized and sensible. Sometimes I mean, Steve, you've probably seen it too, right? There's a lot of junk on it that's not necessary
Right,
or
right.
old, you know?
How
I
And
about
think the very first thing is to unpack how it got so messy, and then ask them that, and then listen and make your notes. How did it get this way?
a lot of them
Why is
fess up
this?
and they say it's them. A lot of them sit there and go, "It's my fault." It's like, I try to do
Well,
it myself.
and to your point, Linda, the second thing is ask them directly. If a bar auditor walked into their firm tomorrow, what and found out that things were a mess, how would they handle that? And that's right away, that opens the door that lets them know that you are speaking the truth. You're experienced with it. You're there to help them, and you're prying and trying to get the feedback from them of how it happened and where you're going to go next. And then you work on those root causes. And to your point, the trust account obviously is we're going to jump in that right away because that's the most exposure.
Well, that came up in a conversation too. Don't forget when we did the trust, this weekend when we did our little game, that came up in the conversation at the law lab because they're like, well, what do you do? I think I started the conversation like, what do you do if you go to a client, you've examined the trust, you pull up the balance sheet, all dates, filter it down by year, and you find out that this goes all the way back to 2001. How do you have that conversation with the attorney? And we went really deep into that and how do you have a conversation when they go, I'm not going back to 2001. Are you crazy? I'll go back to 2022. And how do you handle that conversation? And that's kind of the value of the law lab is we kind of all dug into what we've had to say because we've had those conversations and they're not easy conversations because it's not cheap to go all the way back to 2001.
Yeah.
Or when they say, I'm not going to spend money for you to find a nickel.
Yeah.
I'm not going to handle that leftover nickel on this client's ledger account. It's like, well, you have to.
Yeah. Well, it's like you both said, it's the structure, it's the foundation, that chart of accounts. And what's fascinating is sometimes we get into them, and I jokingly said the vendor names. Sometimes you see the vendor names on the chart of accounts, so that's no place for that.
Right.
The question back to that is, how does that fit on a tax return? And then what are your goals? I think, Steve, is what you were kind of saying too. It's how did you get here? Because what are the goals?
How'd you get here? Yeah.
Well, you've asked attorneys when you've seen stuff like that, like employee names, and you're like, Sarah relates it right to the person. Would you like to take this set of books to the bank if you were trying to get a loan?
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't.
And then because it's like I wanted it this way, I wanted to see Staples and Office Max and all of these on there, and you have to explain to them and educate them. There's other ways of getting how much you spend at Staples, how much you spend at Office Max. But then if you just say it like that, like the way these books are, and the same goes for the other conversation about the trust. How would the conversation go if the auditor came in? You've got this big, giant, unknown client pile of money there.
Yeah.
It's not going to fly.
Yeah.
And you can't have that. And that's the problem. And that's the biggest problem.
Which leads to some of the quick things too, and tips and tricks is when you're looking at these cleanup moments. So we talked about the ledger. There's the whole thing about, and you just brought this up, is these stale dated moments, these balances. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be just trust. You could have old payroll liabilities. You could have shareholder loans with people that are not even there anymore. They're not even part of the company.
Paychecks that aren't cleared. I have seen paychecks that haven't cleared and they just leave it. It might not be for a lot of money, but they just leave it. You can't just leave it. It belongs
or unapplied funds when they get lost in that quagmire.
Oh yeah. Touche.
That's a good term for it, Steve. Quagmire.
I love that word, quagmire.
Let me try and say it. Quagmire. Okay.
Well, and when you get that, when you have that on the books, like you're printing out, maybe they came from desktop. And they never saw those words, and then you get it online. Their first year on online, QuickBooks Online, they're like, "What is this amount?" Or this year, it's been, "What's this QuickBooks clearing payroll account that just appeared with a bunch of money in it?" And it's like
it goes in and out depending on the date.
Hard to explain that one.
You know, Linda, you brought up a really good point, and I think we've all three experienced this. Is when you have those data migration moments. What is the data that comes over that you can actually rely on, and what do you have to go back to? That is also if you're sitting on a set of books that are still unresolved, because we've seen it, we've heard it. That big trust bank account balance isn't balancing, so just go into another one, open up a new one. But where's all the data that occurred with that information? Where does that exist? And I think what you're saying is a very valid point of when you're cleaning up some tips and tricks on a ledger like that, you really do have to find this. You have to roll back. You've got to find the source data. And what happened at the bank?
How many banks ago did that happen?
How many banks ago did that happen?
Sometimes they change banks. And it's like, or the bank changes. Just on its own. And you've got these issues that kind of carry forward. And when you're talking to the attorneys, they've been aware of the issue. It's been ongoing and it makes them not sleep at night.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you can help them through the whole logic of fixing and cleaning this. If you just kind of explain a methodical way you're going to do it, you have to go back to when it was last balanced. That's the only way to get going, to go forward. You don't want to go backwards. It doesn't work. So
Yeah.
find that spot and go forward. And if you have to hard reconcile something because they don't want to go back, it's $20 delta and they don't know who it belongs to or whatever, you're going to have that in your books. It's going to show as the unknown client or whatever. And it might just be money you didn't move over, but you
Mm-hmm.
have to put it on the books wherever you make that start. So you really want to go as back as far as you have to. And a
Yeah.
lot of times the cleanup in the earlier years isn't as much. It's not till you get to them when they get more robust. There's a lot going on and there's patterns we see and it can be done, but it's not a cheap date. It is not a cheap date. You are going to be looking at paying quite a bit to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you have to have good processes to go forward so that
Mm-hmm.
you stop the bleeding. That's a big deal too.
Implement a monthly ledger review protocol,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
a workflow for closing the books each month. And to
Mm-hmm.
your point, Linda, when the question comes up of, okay, my trust account's out of balance, clear back to 2001, the best answer is we're going to chronologically balance it to the best of our abilities back to 2020 because that's what you've requested. But we're going to report back to you and tell you whether you're still in balance or not. And if not, we're going to ask to go back further until we can find it.
And I think, I don't know if this is true or not, but sometimes they'll say, well, I can't get the bank statements back that far. But I think with a trust or an IOLTA account, don't they have to have those? I mean, you just have to pay for them.
Each bank is different.
Each
But
Some
one's different. Yeah.
each one's different. But I mean, to what you both are saying, one thing is when you get into these messy accounts, we've also seen places where an entire credit card was not added to a prior year. Now you
Mhm.
have all these expenses, right? That what do you do? You have to make it's not your decision to make. You have to engage a tax professional. You have to engage the owner to go back and say, is this worth it? Because it's in my experience, at one point it had a lot of client data on there. And
We've seen it where
it
we
was all
get the
advanced client cost.
you get this book of business, you get
Yeah.
the data file, and you're like, what is this credit card with a giant negative balance? So the bookkeeper was booking in all the payments.
Yeah.
There was no evidence of any expenses put in, like Sarah's saying, and you don't have anything. And a lot of times there's client expenses on there that has to get put in. And then did you not recoup them because you didn't have them in the book somehow? And you
Well,
know,
I'll tell you what it did. It overstated your income because you had
yes.
no offset. So now you've just paid taxes on something in a prior period. This is
Mhm.
why it's so important to really have this kind of viewpoint of what am I not seeing in here? Because if you're overpaying in taxes, is that really what you wanted to be doing? Only
Yeah.
to receive it back a couple years later, if you're lucky, or refile
If you're lucky. Yeah.
if you're lucky, and then refile. Or you started your business, a friend helped you do the taxes. They didn't do it quite right because it wasn't really a certified, they just kind of generally knew. And then we professionals like us get in and we're like, whoa, where's all this stuff? It's missing in your tax return. It's
Well,
not
tell
our
me,
position to find that. It's just
right.
it just shows up, right? As business owners are we ourselves will see stuff. Um,
Your credit card example reminded me of one that I came across on a new file,
okay.
where through the bank feeds it posted everything backwards. So
Oh, I've
all
seen
Seen
that.
that.
have you seen that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what they did is they went through and they reconciled against the real transactions and they left all they had to finagle things around and they left all kinds of uncleared transactions on the ledger.
Oh.
And it totaled, it was a little under $20,000. I'm like, well, what is this? Oh, that was that mess from when it brought it all in backwards. And I'm like, well, we have to address that. We've got to clean that up. And it was a prior year. And it, to your point, Sarah, we had to get the tax preparer CPA involved. And what do you want to do here? Here's $20,000 of, stuff that
Mhm.
nets out to 20,000 in expenses,
Mhm.
that reduce their taxable income in that year. So what do we want to do with this?
Yeah, and it's not your decision solely, obviously.
Right.
You do
Right.
need, I would never endeavor that alone in that way.
No.
I would talk about it and say we need to involve the tax in
Tax person, yeah.
person
And I
for
think
sure. Yeah.
when it comes to client ledgers, a lot of times we get them and they've only got the one because they hooked up Clio and everything dumped into one, but they have no
Yeah.
clue. And For us, it's easier to visually map it out to the subledgers of each client so we can see the listing. I know
Yeah.
not everybody does that, but it's something that we like to do because especially if they're big, if it's a big file, because then you can really manage it. The fund is all done, and the people, they're all done. They've closed the matter. You can get rid of them. I don't know. It's just, and I like to be able to hop in, and then the bar likes that, so they like to hop in and get the ledger for the bar.
Mhm.
It's so simple because the ledger's there. It's like the little mini check register for each client, and I think that that helps keep it orderly. And
Yeah.
sometimes when you're trying to dig through and you can't figure out who it belongs to, sometimes you can go in and throw it into that unknown client account as you're going through and trying to get the details from the client, or the office, like this happened and this money came in. Does anybody have any record of who it belonged to? And then when you get done doing the method of kind of doing what we're doing, you'll see, oh, this person brought in, this person's got 10,180 negative in their account. They have no trust funds coming in, but then we see that there's 10,000, like the check came in from the insurance company is $10,180 sitting in unknown. And you kind of can put the two together and realize that those two probably
That's a
were.
great way to do it.
Yeah,
That's a
it's
good way to
easier to
do it. Yeah.
find. It's
Yeah.
kind of like finding gold when you're trying to go through these, especially if the amounts, unlike family law or some of these,
Yeah.
practice areas that we go in, that's so many of the same amounts. When you get into some of the other files, you can start to see patterns based on
Well,
who's doing the
and
work.
being the numbers geeks that we are, it's fun to do it that way
Hmm.
because once you clean up each ledger and then you've got that unknown client one where you're dumping everything you don't know about, you're like, oh, I get to get rid of that ten thousand
Yeah, you
dollars out
get
of
one
there.
off the list.
It's like a puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle.
A
Hmm.
jigsaw puzzle. It's fascinating too. As you were saying this, Linda, I was thinking about one that recently that I was looking at, and yeah, it's always hard to remember this, but you're looking at someone else's work product too. So, what if there was
Hmm.
a bookkeeper before you, but they don't have that depth of knowledge, or it's that paralegal that got dumped on that was like,
Hmm.
here you go, you're gonna do this work, and so you're looking at it, and now you have this extra layer of what were they thinking? Because
Yeah.
the way that they worked the product, the ledgers, every ledger is a little different. Every ledger is going to display itself slightly differently in how it's going to show you the information, how it moves from bank to bank, and so forth. And I'm looking at this and I was like, I can't have this tangled up. Well, it unleashed what was attached to that transaction was a lot of other transactions, and it unraveled this big mess. And
Mhm.
now you've got a bigger mess. So, kind of what you're saying, both of you, is you have to look at these workflows, look at these little micro moments, and then hopefully you're not creating more chaos when you're trying it. But to me, Linda knows this, I always follow the money. Where is that money? Does
That's the
that,
source of truth.
yeah. And it doesn't matter what these external practice management softwares retain. That was your intent or lack thereof. Maybe you didn't even put it in. So,
But we see that
yeah.
like with Clio. So a lot of times we'll start to see the pattern where there's maybe you'll hop in a file and you'll see undeposited funds for the last 5 years sitting inside of Clio, but everything's been booked. And we're
Yeah.
like, well, what are these extra transactions? And then you spot the problem in the workflow, that there's a problem in the workflow. The attorney's going back and making some changes in Clio. It's shipping another transaction over, and no one's paying any attention to undeposited funds. And
Yeah.
then it's got this big bloated balance. And why didn't the tax person ask about it? But it depends on the tax person. Not everybody's that versed in QuickBooks, right? And you start to figure out and see the problem. And then you need to work with your client. Don't make them keep going with these problems. You want to lock out the period now
Yeah.
that they can't push any more data in that's double data coming back from Clio because it's a one-way sync on some parts of it. And then you're stopping the problem of all this accumulative deposits that's sitting under deposited funds and not go anywhere. And then you need to go in and clean up that and figure out, okay, well, look at you have the register open here, you've got the undeposited here. Okay, so this goes over there, and you start to see where they're supposed to go. Maybe the person didn't do anything wrong in Clio. They just used the bank feed in QuickBooks and just deposited everything into
Yeah.
sales or income, legal income. And nobody put the payments in. We've seen that too. It can go
Yeah.
page after page. So if you work in QuickBooks, I remember the first time I discovered this, I always had these workflows and I never had more than a page of undeposited funds. And a big mistake I made when I did a job was I looked at it and saw the one page of 50 and I quoted that and I didn't realize it was 50 pages inside of that. That if you went to the next
Oh,
page, it was 50, and the next page was 50.
Oh,
I had to eat that one because it was
Terrible.
my mistake.
Or software. I'm in my example, I shared this with you years ago, hooking up particular software and it brought in all the OpenAR, but
Right.
that OpenAR was not correctly marked in the other software. So then I had to deal with it on the other side. It was like ridiculous. It was an error in integration
Hmm.
and it was such a problem. And so there's so many little cleanup hacks that you can do. I think it's like the start, it's like
Processes, right? You need
open
a
the
list.
box.
You kind of need a list. I don't know,
Yeah.
we might have one somewhere with the law lab, but you need a cleanup list to kind
Yeah.
of methodically go through each one. And then you need a list for when you're doing a quote to a client so that you know what to look for, that you don't miss
Mhm.
the 50 pages of undeposited funds, or any little thing that you didn't realize. Sometimes we try to figure out what we're going to charge for a cleanup, and then we open up Pandora's box. It's a lot worse or bigger than we thought.
Oh, yeah.
Um, it's happened, but sometimes we have the opposite happen. So it kind of balances itself out. And when you get better, the more you do them. But I can tell you that if you have one of those disaster cleanups where it's like, okay, Sarah and I, we made a mistake. And now guess who's doing work on the weekend because it's not going to be cost
I think
effective to
we've
have
all
the
been
team do
there.
it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a part of
Yeah.
life, right?
Part
But
of it. Yeah.
know that we've all done it and it's missing things when you're doing that's why a good checklist is nice to have that
Yeah.
you can check off the list of looking at every single thing because you want to make
Well,
sure things
the
are
thing
correct.
to do too is on either side of the fence, one side of the fence being the attorney and the other side being the accounting bookkeeping side, is not to be afraid of it and
Mm.
not to be in a rush. And a lot of times the attorney side will be in a rush because they finally admit that there's a
Always.
problem. Yeah. And so you have to psychologically prepare them with your work methods and your
Yeah.
workflow, and that you're going to get this done, but it's not going to be done short ordered.
Right.
Hmm.
And you
It's
want to
got to be
tell
done
them the
right.
expectation is 2 months down the road. Hey, if you get it done in 6 weeks, you're the hero. But if you tell them 2 months down the road and it takes you six, they get mad. So you don't
Right.
want to do that either. You want to really outperform your own,
Hmm.
date. And it takes time.
It
It
It's
takes
does
not
take
easy.
time.
And sometimes the stopping block is the client not
Yeah.
providing what they had. And you have to ask for spreadsheets. We've said this, I think, almost every podcast. They have a side spreadsheet somewhere, like they were tracking it on a spreadsheet at one point. And if you're having to dig back a lot of years, ask about that because it probably
Hmm.
exists that there's a spreadsheet
So
somewhere
I,
that they
I
had it.
guess the question is, it's urgent enough to hire somebody, but you've lived with it for this long. Why is it all of a sudden urgent enough to have it accomplished? Not that you want a project to go
To
on
be an audit.
forever. Yeah. But I guess that's the thing is
Mhm.
going back to when you're inquiring and doing this discovery moment and trying to figure out what's going on is what is the impetus behind it? Some people do it
Mhm.
purely because it has been nagging at them, as we brought up earlier,
They
and
want to sleep at night.
exactly. The other part is kind of what Linda's saying is you got to set the boundaries in a space of like achievable and obtainable, but not
Right.
to your point, Steve, at a speed or shortcut it because you don't understand it. We've had other accounting professionals come to us and have us look at it with them. So being smart and hiring another person who has deeper knowledge and saying, okay, can I get another set of eyes?
Mhm.
What
I
would you
really
do?
just
Yeah.
need to look at this. What am I missing? And honestly, I'm going to tell you right now, it is not an easy thing for it to find in AI tools. So if you're thinking that's your out, I'm sorry.
Mm.
It doesn't make up for human error in other areas and
Mhm.
lack of data and lack of information. It's just looking at the structure of it. It's not looking at, it doesn't have the story behind it.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of pieces to this. So I throw that out with a word of caution because you really need human piece to your point, Steve, that you brought up and Linda's saying like have a checklist, build a structure for yourself. And not every file is going to be the same. They're all going to be different.
No.
I mean,
We would like them to be cookie cutters, and that quote's going to be cookie cutter, but they're not.
faster.
They're just not.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Well,
know.
a great example to use too is with them when they're really in a hurry and they think they can have it done in 2 weeks or whatever. I use this comparison of, the ship has left the harbor with the anchor dragging, and each of those links on that chain that
Oh,
holds
that
that
sounds
anchor
so
down
bad.
have to be pulled back in and made sure that they're still strong and that they're still all pulling
I
together
love
to
it.
That's
And,
a
you know, a
great
lot of people stop and they go, yeah, you know what? For some reason that pings with them,
Yeah.
and they kind of give you the grace of being able to get through it and understanding sometimes that it does take
Can
longer.
we change the title of this? I'm kidding.
The ship
As
left
your
the
ship
harbor.
sailed with the anchors down.
With the anchor dragon behind you. Well, this was a good conversation. Thank you
It
both for this.
was.
If you liked what you heard today, don't forget to like, share, and leave a quick review. It's the easiest way to help other accountants and lawyers discover our little corner of the podcast world. And while you're at it, hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Do you have a question or a topic that you'd love us to cover? Drop us a line at info@accountantslawpod.com, through our website, accountantslawpod.com, or leave us a comment on one of our socials. Your idea might just make it into a future episode. And if you want to go beyond listening, consider sponsoring an episode and connect with our community of accounting and legal professionals who love learning, laughing, and leveling up. And don't forget to join the conversation inside the Accountants Law Lab Mastermind group at accountantslawlab.com, where collaboration meets inspiration every week.
Well, thank you both. This was good.
This is a good topic.
Yeah.
It was great. You guys have a good day.